Hello and welcome to Coffee with Carol. This morning's session is Best Practices for IBM Security Administration. Based on her just released ebook on security administration, Carol this morning is the authority on IBM security, discusses the tasks that every IBM security administrator should perform, from system values to managing user profiles, administrating authorities, and handling IFS security issues. Carol provides guidance for automating tasks as well as tips for simplifying them. We are happy to have you with us this morning for Coffee with Carol, sponsored by SkyView Partners. SkyView Partners delivers security administration and compliance reporting solutions for IBM AIX, and Linux. And the key word here is solutions. Our goal is to draw on the unparalleled expertise of our team of experts led by Carol to consult with and provide customers answers to help them automate mundane administrative tasks and compliance reporting, as well as to improve security. Our presenter this morning is Carol Woodbury, co-founder, president, and CTO of SkyView Partners. Prior to forming SkyView, Carol spent 16+ years at IBM in positions including Chief Engineering Manager and Security Architect for IBM's Security Group. She's also the author of the book, IBM Security Administration and Compliance, which is available on MC Press online. SkyView Partners has a number of solutions that we can help you with, and we're happy to work with you. Our security managed services for security administration is a monthly service where critical security administration topics are monitored, and you're notified if something needs your attention. So I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about that and see if we can help you, how SkyView Partners can help you. We also have our security checkup for both IBM AIX, and Linux, as well as our remediation services. SkyView Partners also has various software solutions, the SkyView Risk Assessor, a diagnostic tool of comparison to best practices, SkyView Policy Minder, an automated security administration tool to make sure your configuration stays the way your policy intends, Audit Journal Reporter, or predefined auditor-ready reports, and we also now have SkyView Policy Minder for open systems. If you'd like to see more about that, please contact us, and keep in mind that all SkyView Partners software is currently available on an unlimited software license as well. So with that, I want to start this morning's session, Best Practices for IBM Security Administration, and introduce today's presenter, Carol Woodbury. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, JD. Thanks for that introduction. And there we go. Just need to show my screen, so there we go. I think we're good. JD, can you see my screen now?
I can. Keep in mind that we are recording this morning's session, everyone, and again, if you do have questions, type them in the dialog box and we will answer them either at the end of the session or after we get done. So.
All right, thanks everyone. It's been a while since we've chatted, so I'm glad that we can share this time together, and I hope it will be helpful for you. The reason that I wanted to present this particular topic was because I see an increased risk coming about. And so because of that, when security is not administered, there is significant risk to the system and to the data. So what do I mean by risk? Well, everybody thinks first and foremost of having their system be hacked. And you may be sitting there saying, well, that's not going to happen to me or my organization. But if you are paying attention to any kind of the security news at all, you'll see that targeted attacks and random attacks are on the increase, and they're coming through distributed denial of service attacks. There's also just random attacks coming, and basically what happens is that the hackers are out there, and they will hit at the most vulnerable spot. So what you want to do is throw up as much and as many layers of defense as possible so they go someplace else. We're not going to stop the hacking community, but what you want them to do is move along and stop at not attack your site and not attack your system. But say that they do attack your site. Well, what is the last line of defense before they get to the critical data that is on your IBM That's IBM security. And there's many layers of security that you can put in place right on IBM I. The other thing that I see is administrators have just become so busy that the thought of security is overwhelming. And so a lot of the things that were traditionally done through system administrators to administrate the security in the system just simply aren't being done because there's so many other things that weigh heavily in your priority list. And because security may be intimidating to some people, or you may just not know how to attack it, security tends to stay by the wayside. And so therein lies another level of risk. It's just not being administered. So another layer of risk, or another thing to think about when evaluating what the risk is to your data, is the accidental error, or the unintentional error. So if people have too much authority, then they may be able to modify data, or hit the wrong button and upload a spreadsheet instead of download a spreadsheet. And if you think that you have users that don't know how to do that type of thing, that don't know how to use ODBC or don't know how to use FTP, then clearly you don't have anybody under the age of 40 working in your organization, because people know how to do this. So if you think that that's not the case, then truly you're in denial. So let's realize that that can happen and realize what you can do. Another way of unintentional access is perhaps enabling profiles that are inactive and enabling them by accident. Maybe you have to do a role swap to your backup system, and your inactive profiles are still on the system, and when you do a role swap, you re-enable all the profiles on the system. Well, now you just re-enabled all these inactive profiles. Maybe some have default passwords. You've just given people opportunity to get at the system that weren't there. So the whole idea of this presentation is to give you a task list, basically a list of things to do and things to look at on your system so that you can properly administrate the system. And the whole idea is to reduce the risk to the data and to the system itself. So let's start in on this. Okay, so security policy. Now I can hear people switch off when they say security policy, because you say you're not in charge of security policy. And in larger organizations that might be true, and I understand that. But you are in charge of implementing the security policy as it pertains to IBM I. So you want to make sure that you have done that, that you adhere to your organization's requirements, okay? The other thing is that if you aren't already, I would encourage you to be a part of the annual review of the security policy. And why? Well, all the input is necessary from all the various technology areas. And I would encourage you to be an advocate for reducing risk in your organization. So some of the things that you want to be looking for in that security policy are really the missing items. And so the things that you would want to be looking for are things like the types of data that you have in your system. There are organizations that have started to take credit cards, for example, for payment. So you would want to make sure that the credit card data is accounted for, meaning the protection of that credit card data is accounted for in your organization's security policy. Or maybe you have basically the information that makes up your corporation residing on your IBM I. You want to make sure that the data policies within the security policy address the importance of that data and address the effective use and appropriate use of that data. So again, what I'm advocating is that you be an advocate for reducing risk in your organization. The other thing that you want to make sure of is that new technology is covered. And a few months ago, I did a coffee with Carol, and we chatted about bring your own device and the various things that you have to be aware of with bring your own device, and certainly having that as part of your security policy is very critical to the successful rollout and implementation and how it all works. So make sure that new technology is covered. And things like social media, the use of social media, along with the importance, emphasizing the importance of the appropriate use of your data. All of that needs to be covered. So, okay, I understand that you might not be responsible for writing the security policy, but you can be a part of making it a good policy. Okay, so the other thing that I have observed over the years, and again, I've been at this for quite a long time, so one of the things that I see that has an issue, and a lot of times system values are in place and they're in good shape. So I'm not saying this happens all the time, but there are a handful of system values that tend to be problematic, and they are very much security related. So what I want is that, of course, security best practices, that your system values meet security best practices. So I've listed some places there that you can go and look for references for security best practices. IBM I Security Reference, my book, the IBM I Security Administration and Compliance, and if you happen to have our Risk Assessor product, the output from that, it gives security best practices. Now, of course, security best practices is what I like, but I also am of the understanding that not all businesses can meet security best practices. So what you want to do in that case is compare the best practices setting to what you have and evaluate the risk. You'll want to evaluate the risk of both changing the value and not changing the value. And based on that risk and based on your business requirements, you'll come up with a decision as to whether you actually make those changes or not. So the ones that I really are pretty adamant about you evaluating and taking a stand one way or the other are obviously the Q security system value, and there are still systems out there that are running at security level 30. And it's been the recommended setting from IBM for many, many years now. And I will say right now that there is very little evidence that systems can't run at level 40 these days. So I'm pretty adamant about getting a plan in place to get to security level 40 if you're not there already. The other one that I tend to see are the password system values. So the QPWD asterisk system values. So the one that tends to be problematic is the password expiration interval. And again, most organizations have come to the point that they realize they need to have regular password changes, but there are still organizations out there that don't have regular password changes. And I have to emphasize that that is a key in making sure security is regularly addressed, if you will. And people say, well, people can't remember their passwords, and they're going to write them down. You know, I was just on a website this morning logging in to make a hotel reservation, and I had to change my password. So even my hotel websites are making me change my password. So I have a real hard time when we're talking about business function and business machines that we can't change passwords. The other thing is the composition rules of those passwords. And heads up, again, for anybody that's running our Risk Assessor product, our best practice setting for the length of passwords is going to be changing in this next release that's coming up. And it's going to be changing from 7 to 8 because that's where the industry is moving. So we're changing that best practice setting. So again, I realize you have to balance that with the needs of your business, but I encourage you to take a look at those values and make sure that they really are set to a point that it's not too hard to remember a password or to make up a new one, but yet is not easily guessed. The other system values that you want to take a look at are the auditing system values, and the last one is QCreateAut. Now, QCreateAut is probably one that isn't discussed a whole lot, but that is a system value that sets the default public authority setting for newly created objects. And it is, I shudder when I see that value that has been set to all, because that means the public authority setting of any newly created object is now set to public all. So I'd like to encourage you to take a look at that value. If you've set it to all, you need to put a project in place to pull that back down, to change or use or even exclude. And yes, all of those values are possible. There's a bit of work that's involved to reduce that, but you can change the default value. So those are the system values that I would encourage you to look at and see if they meet the best practices. Okay, so from a system and security administration point of view, auditing is very important, and I mentioned that in the system value setting. So here are the recommended settings for the odd level system value. These are the actions that would be audited at a minimum. And a lot of you already have these set, but I still run into some people who have never turned auditing on. And auditing is one of those things that even if you don't proactively look at the reports, the information logged in the audit journal is so important if you need to do any kind of investigation for an incident. It's also very important from a system administration point of view because it can help you do your daily job. It can help you figure out what process deleted a file and shouldn't have. I was just helping somebody yesterday who was wondering why their startup program wouldn't run after an IPO. And within that startup program, it submitted a job, and the profile running the startup program didn't have enough authority to submit the job under the profile that it was supposed to run under, and that's why it was failing. Well, we figured that out because there was an AF, or an authority failure entry, in the audit journal. So it can help you do your daily job. But from a security administration point of view, if you aren't looking for exceptions to the rules within your security setting, you may be missing some things. So things like invalid sign-on attempts for QSEC offer, or changes to powerful profiles, that type of thing. So make sure you at least have auditing turned on. So if you need to go backwards and investigate something, you have the data. I also recommend that you turn on command auditing for any user that has access to a command line, and that will log the actual command strings that they log, and again, it goes to the audit journal. Again, a very powerful tool for you if you have to go back and investigate and see what happened. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, and this is where I find that a lot of organizations have an issue with this, and it's mainly because the journal receivers aren't being managed properly. And by that, I mean they aren't actually being saved properly. So a lot of people will save their journal receivers when they save the system. So maybe on a weekend they'll do a full system save and they'll save their audit journal receivers. But their system may be so busy that they take their receivers off the system every 2 to 3 days. So when they do the full system save on the weekend, they only have 2 to 3 days worth of audit journal receivers, not the entire week. So if, again, you have to go backwards and investigate something, you'll be missing very important information. The other thing is that that actually does not comply from a compliance point of view. It doesn't even comply with PCI. You have to have the full range. But just from a security administration point of view, you want your whole set of journal receivers. So I recommend that you save your journal receivers to either a separate media so that you know what the date range is, or you come up with some scheme so that you make sure that you have a full set of receivers. So again, this is something that many organizations have a challenge with right now, and I would encourage you to take a look at it and make sure your journal receivers are being saved properly. Okay, managing user profiles. And there are several aspects to managing user profiles that I see falling by the wayside, and one of them is managing inactive profiles. And I have to tell you, this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. When I see profiles that are inactive, and no, there will always be some profiles that are inactive. So I totally understand that, and that is totally appropriate. Things like profiles that own objects, group profiles, the IBM profiles often show up as being inactive and that sort of thing. When it goes into the pet peeve range of mine is when I see hundreds or thousands of user profiles that have not been used in years, literally, like since the last time you upgraded hardware. And the reason that this is a problem, and the reason this raises the risk to your data, is again, if somehow, those profiles aren't set to a status of disabled, then they could be used. Somebody could go along if they know your naming convention, if they know that you don't take profiles off of people who have left the company, somebody could go in and attempt to use that user profile, and they could be performing deeds with more authority than their own authority simply because they've usurped somebody else's user profile. So remove that risk to your data, remove that risk to your system, and get rid of those inactive profiles. Now, that said, again, I realize that from a business perspective, there are some organizations that run applications that when the profile is deleted from the system, it kind of wreaks havoc with the application. So I've seen that, I understand that. So in that case, what you want to do is not just disable the profile, but you actually remove every vestige of authority and privilege that it has. So not only do you disable it, but you remove the password. In other words, you set the password to star none, you set the initial program to none, and the initial menu to sign off. You just take this thing down to nothing, like the storage available that it can use down to 0 so that it can't create objects and so forth. And basically, you're just leaving a shell of a profile so that even if it gets enabled, it really can't be used at all. So for those organizations that have that type of issue, that's the steps that you want to take. Obviously, you'd remove any group profiles, any special authorities, and so forth. The other thing that you have to look at, and again, what I see kind of been sliding over the past few years, is that there are more profiles with default passwords being created. And you really just want to get in a process of not creating those passwords with a default from the beginning. And I also see users, and a lot of people probably on this phone are the biggest offenders of setting your own administrative profiles to a never-changing password. And that is one of the biggest no-nos you can do, because if somebody guesses your password, they can use it forever, and they will have that forever. You've just given them a door into your system with a lot of power forever. Obviously not the point of risk that you want to take. Another thing that I see falling in disarray is group assignments. And when you have group assignments, you want to make sure that you are reviewing the group assignments on a regular basis. So when I say regular, I'd say a minimum of annually, if not quarterly. And the thing that you want to do there from a security administration point of view, and the reason this is a problem, is that when people move jobs within the organization, they will often have to get a new group profile assigned to them, because that's what gives them their privileges, their group profile. And that's all well and good, but often they will have to keep one foot in their old job and one foot in their new job for a while until their replacement has been trained up. So while you give them their new group assignment, you often can't take away their old one, and then they never call back and say, okay, I'm only in my new job, take away my old group. So unless you have some sort of review going on that will review and see who is a member of the group and should they still be a member of that group, it will fall into disarray. So there are people, I've seen numerous people that have groups that have basically become meaningless because they have people from inventory control, payroll, legal, accounting, all in the same group. And at one point in time, they were all in the accounting department, but now people have left to different places, to go different places. So you have people that have access to data that they shouldn't have access to, and so you need to unwind that. So what you can do right now, even if you don't have time to unwind the current groups, just make sure that going forward the group assignment is appropriate, and start reviewing the groups now. Again, you might not have the ability to totally unwind a group that has gotten totally out of disarray, but you can start by creating new groups right now and assigning those appropriately and putting a review process in place. I like to start projects, even if you can't clean up the mess that you have, I like to start from this day forward creating things with the right authorities and right group assignments. Special authorities is another one of those areas that if you start today and start creating users with only the special authorities that they need to perform their tasks, instead of all the special authorities that they may have thought that they needed or were copied from profile to profile, if you start today and only give them the authorities that they need, then going forward, it will get better over time, and it will never be worse than it is today. So over time, you are reducing risk to your data in your system. And as a security administrator, your job is to reduce risk. So this is one way to start that today. Okay, so the reason we're all sitting here or standing here, if you happen to be standing up listening to this, the reason that we are here today is because we have data residing on an IBM I. And that data, most likely, is incredibly important to your organization. It's kind of what makes your organization, if you will. It's the heart and soul. And that's why we love this system, because it is so reliable, it's so robust, performance is great. When we think about that data and it's important to the organization, we have to think about protecting it from a security and access point of view. So to determine if the right access is on the data, you have to first determine the value of the data to the organization. And I'm not talking about a literal figure. I mean, if you want to do that, go ahead. But mentally you can say this is like the highest priority data our organization has. Our organization runs off this data, so it is very valuable to the organization. Or it's a secondary piece of the organization. We run one application, so if that data wasn't available for some reason, it would be bad but not catastrophic type of thing. So value to the organization, just kind of characterize that. Then determine the cost of that data being altered, being unavailable, lost, or stolen. So altered. Let's talk about that. If the public authority setting on your files is change or all, then that setting gives anybody on the system the authority to modify the data. And again, I'm hearing people say, my users don't have access to a command line, they can't get to that data, I don't have to worry about it. Again, your users, if they have access to a PC, probably have access to the internet, they can download a freeware ODBC and JDBC client that will very readily talk to your IBM I. And I've seen this happen. So if you think that it can't, again, you're kidding yourself. So you have to think, is the data in a position of being altered? Well, what happens if that data gets altered? And it could be malicious, but more than likely it would be by accident. Again, something being uploaded instead of downloaded, and it would be altered. The other thing is then if it's altered, then you have to put it back. So, or it could be deleted depending on what the authorities are. So then it would be totally unavailable. So think about what happens if your primary application is not available to your organization. What happens in that case? The other thing is what happens if the data is lost, meaning like a lost set of media that contains that information, or worse, it could be stolen. And if you don't think this happens, then you're not looking at the news either, but corporate espionage is on the rise. So that happens as well. So determining the value of the organization and the cost to the organization, and I really should have another bullet in there on probability of this happening, depending on all of those factors, that's the type of layers of defense and how many layers of defense you want to put in place to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. For some organizations, you are going to want to put in as many layers of defense as IBM I provides. And for others, it's not going to be as many. It totally depends on your business and how important that data is to the running of your organization. And some people think that I want all data on the system to be public exclude and nobody has access. And that's not the case. Again, it totally depends on your organization. And it's up to you as a security administrator to guide and to work with the owners of the data to understand what the appropriate settings are for your data. So it's usually either public exclude or public use. A lot of times there are organizations where the information on IBM I is available to anybody that has access to the system. They can read it, not a problem. They just don't want it to be modified. And so, again, it depends on your needs of the organization. So, again, the point of this slide is to determine the value of the data to your organization, look at the access controls that are in place right now, determine if those are appropriate for the value of the data to your organization and the level of risk of having it being modified, altered, unavailable, lost, or stolen. And then determine if you have enough layers of defense in place or if you need to put more in place. Now, I'm calling out adopted authority because I've heard from some people that they think it's dangerous and should never be used. And I have to disagree with that assertion, so I wanted to address it directly. Adopted authority is fine, but it does need to be used with caution. The key is to adopt and have objects be owned by the least amount, by a profile that has the least amount of authority and privilege as possible. There's no need to adopt, have a program be owned by QSEC offer and adopt all special authorities anytime you adopt authority. There are times when you need to adopt that amount of power, and as long as you have a program that does the task that requires that authority and that power, and it only does that task and then returns, there's no problem with having that type of power being adopted. It needs to be limited. You also have to be cautious about making sure command lines aren't put up when adopted authority is in place, because the adopted authority could flow out to that command line. So adopted authority is not bad in and of itself, but it does need to be used wisely. So as a security administrator, you'll want to monitor the use of adopted authority. And by that, I mean you want to have some sort of review and criteria in place for when programs should or shouldn't adopt authority. One of the criteria is if the program puts up a command line, it should never be adopting authority, right? The other thing is that when you are adopting authority within an application, a lot of times the initial menu will be the thing that adopts authority. And that, again, may be fine for some organizations. But if you are an organization that wants to make sure that the adopted authority doesn't flow out to things like work spool file, work query, start SQL, you want to make sure that that adopted authority starts later in the application and not at that initial program. So what I like to do from an adopted authority point of view, from a security administrator point of view, is take a snapshot of the programs that adopt right now and then have a process in place that when a new program that adopts authority gets put into production, there's a review of what it does. And at least you're aware of what it does and aware of what profile it's adopting. Our Policy Minder product actually helps you with that, but you need some type of process in place so that you are aware of new programs going onto your system that adopt authority, especially those that adopt all object. So the IFS, the Integrated File System, there are so many comments out there about what do I do about the IFS. We've been ignoring the IFS. I think that there's something we need to do in the IFS, but I don't know what to do about the IFS. So my encouragement to you is don't be afraid of the IFS. It's just a directory structure. So if you're familiar with Windows Explorer, it's really just a version of Windows Explorer, only it's on the IBM I. So it's not that big of a deal. You need to translate some of the authorities that are used into different terminology, but all of us have had to grow over the years and learn new terminology, so it's not something to be afraid of. The interesting thing is that it is often very easy to secure the IFS because it's often the case where there's a directory or two that contains some very highly sensitive information. It's often sufficient to just secure the directory and not have to worry about all of the objects in the directory. So again, you're going to have to look at your IFS. You're going to have to look and see where that sensitive data is. You're going to have to look at the risk of leaving that data open or determining really who needs to access that data and closing it down. But it's often much, much, much easier than what you would think it would be initially. When you look at the IFS, you may see all of those directories, but most of the time, the only directories that you really have to be concerned with are 1, 2, maybe 3 directories. So don't be thinking that you have to secure every directory in the IFS. It's not necessary. Again, you take the approach. What data is in the IFS? How sensitive is that data? How important is it to secure that data? And you take that and you measure it with a level of risk, and those directories that contain the most sensitive data with the highest level of risk, if it's exposed, those are the ones you concentrate on. It's all about reducing the risk, evaluating the risk, figuring out what it is, addressing it so that the risk is reduced. So another thing that you can do to reduce the scope of your risk is get rid of old stuff. I was just going through my office today and I realized that I have some files in my file drawer that are just ancient and need to be shredded. I mean, it just needs to go away. And Same thing with a lot of IBM I systems. You need to get rid of those old profiles. We've talked about that already. I can't tell you how many systems I've seen with multiple versions of vendor products. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I recognize this product, or I don't know why, but I have seen more versions of DBU on more systems. I wish I had $1 for every time I saw multiple versions of that product. There is no need. Once you know that that product, the upgraded product, is working, there is absolutely no need to keep the old versions on there. But when you do, you have to worry about the security considerations of those old versions of your products. Anything on the system, even if you think they're not in use, how do you know that? So you have to secure them just like they were in use. So basically, you're doubling your effort when you keep old things on the system. The other thing that I see an overabundance of are change management libraries. I mean, really, are you going to go back 6 months worth of program changes, application changes? Doubtful. And the other thing, then, this is classic, and everybody's going to be kind of laughing and shaking their head, yeah, that pertains to us. Copies made of files or programs before they're changed. Okay, again, wish I had $1 for all of the objects that I've seen on systems that either are a program object of P1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then old, or O, or backup, or, you know, and it's great that the programmer or the process is in place that makes a copy of the original program or the original file before changes are made. I have no argument with that process at all. But once the change is made and there's no problems with it, that original copy needs to go away. Because, again, think of the file that's out there. You now have an old version of a file that has been updated with this new process, but you have a complete version of the file in the previous form. So you have all that data out there. And a lot of times that data is in a developer library or some sort of library outside of the normal production area, and it is totally not secured properly. So again, from a risk perspective, all of these old files and all of the data that's laying around in non-production libraries is presenting huge amounts of risk to your organization, because most of the time it's not secured the way that you want it to be secured. If it's on the system, you have to manage or worry about the security aspects and what the security settings are on those objects. So let's go into save and restore considerations. As a security administrator, you should be caring about how often the save-sec data, the saving of your security data, is performed. I've seen cases where the security data wasn't performed for over a year, and it wasn't like they had an HA system that was backing up the system. It was a standalone system. They have not saved their security data for a year. So what does that mean? They had not saved any user profiles, any private authorities, or authorization lists for over a year. So that means that if the system had crashed and they had to restore the system, they would have not had a backup of any of the profiles that they had created for the last year, any of the private authorities that they had assigned, or any of the authorization lists created. So I get asked periodically, well, how often should I do a save-sec data? And it's one of those it depends questions. So it depends on how active your system is. Working with a client that creates probably up to 50 profiles a day on their system because they're that large of an organization. But then I've worked with clients before that may create 50 profiles in a year, if that. So it really depends on how busy your organization is. But just the thing that you have to think of, and again, the risk to your organization is if the system goes down and you have to recover it, do I have the sufficient tracking to know what all I have to put back in place since the last saved security data. So again, it's kind of a, it depends question, and so you just want to make sure that it's being done, and being done frequently enough to meet the needs of your organization. So thinking about save and restore, it brings me to the thought of Save Sys Special Authority. And Save Sys Special Authority is one of those kind of abused system special authorities. And I say abused because it's overly assigned. And if you think about it, the purpose of Save Sys is to allow the person with that special authority to save or restore anything to the system, regardless of whether they have authority to it or not. So if you think about the type of user that needs to have that capability, it's an administrator like yourself or operators, right? So no one else outside of those types of users should be having Save Sys. So the type of user that often has it that doesn't need it are programmers. And I will get arguments saying, but I need to save my programs. I need to save. Well, if you have authority to it, if you own it or have sufficient authority, you can always save your own objects. So it's not like you're taking away the capability totally. It's that you are taking away the capability of saving everything and saving something to which you don't have authority. So if you look at it like that, you are significantly reducing the risk if you remove the Save Sys special authority, except from those people that really need to do those tasks. So high availability, and a lot of you have HA systems. And obviously the idea is to have that HA system, that target system, be identical to production. But when we do our security checkup service, we will often do both a production system and an HA, the corresponding HA system. And I have yet, in all the years that we've been doing this, to find a system that is exactly the same, two systems that are exactly the same. There may be, the closest I've seen is 1 or 2 user profiles off. But I will often see, close to 100 user profiles off. I've actually seen thousands, and that was a case where the replication, the HA system, didn't detect that profiles were being deleted from the system. So we were able to identify a real problem there. There was something going on with the mirroring in that case. So the things that you want to make sure of from a security perspective that are identical are obviously system values, user profile settings, the ownership of objects, and authorities. So authorization lists, authorities to authorization list assignment to objects, public authority, private authority, etc. So obviously you want something in place that will make sure that those things are being replicated properly or being mirrored properly, so that when you do that failover, security is not your issue. Encryption requirements. And again, think about the purpose of this. We're trying to reduce risk. So there are times when you have data in motion. That's the communication between a client and a server or between servers. Obviously, you don't want clear text passwords to be flowing in the clear. So again, highly recommend you implement SSL between all of your clients and your servers. Recommend encrypted backups, or I should say it's something that I recommend that you consider. You need to, again, take into account the value of the data to your organization. Think about the cost to the organization if that data was lost or stolen. Are you under any kind of state, and most people are in the United States, and it's spread to many countries around the world, that if media is lost or stolen, you have to do a breach notification. But there's usually an exception if the media is encrypted. So there's one of those things about reducing risk that would reduce it quite heavily if your media is encrypted. And you have to also think about having an encrypted disk as well. And then there's data at rest. Okay, so everybody is familiar with the need to encrypt credit card information. That's kind of a given these days. And a lot of people are also encrypting healthcare information. But I encourage you to not stop there in your consideration for whether encryption is required. You may want to encrypt other portions of your application depending on what that value is to your organization. So encryption has been made much more easy in v7.r1, and so again, I would encourage you as security administrators to look at the value of the data to your organization and determine whether encryption is yet another layer of defense that you want to put on that critical data. So all this being said, you're maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed, and the purpose of this was to not overwhelm you, but to give you a place to start. So I cover these topics in this presentation, but it's also in the ebook, and there's a lot more detail, obviously, in the ebook that on this topic. But I have said for many, many years throughout our forming SkyView that SkyView, our mantra, is security starts on an assessment. So you have to figure out where all you have vulnerabilities. I highly recommend that you do this by a security expert, your assessment being done by a security expert. And why do you want to do that? You know, as a security administrator, you, I'm sure, check things that you know to check, and you do that religiously, and you do that well. The problem is, if you aren't up on the latest security threats or the latest additions to the operating system or changing best practices, you may not know to change your metrics or to look at new and different things. So I would encourage you to look at this and have it done by a security expert. The thing that you want to do is get that list of things to do so that you can evaluate that list and determine what you want to do and what you want to do first. Prioritize your list. And it helps because maybe there's some low-hanging fruit that you can get rid of, inactive profiles, and that would immediately reduce your risk. You may want to do a project and do a lot of work items all at once, or you may want to put plans in place to improve and improve your security posture and reduce your risk over a period of time, whatever you want to do. But you have to have a list of things that need to be addressed to know even what those priorities should be. And I have to put an unashamed plug in for our security checkup service. We have helped many, many clients come up with that list of items that they need to be working on from a security perspective. And we can help them address those issues, but at least they have a place to start, and they can work at that as it is important to their organization and choose what they need to do from reducing the risk for their organization. So my plea with you today is that you start somewhere. Again, you may be overwhelmed by all of the things that I've said today, but my plea would be to start on one thing. Just start. Because if you don't do anything, the risk is only going to get greater and greater and greater to the data. And what I want you to do, and what my hope is that the risk to the data and the system is being reduced. It can be reduced in one big project, or you may need or want to do this over a period of time. But you have to start. So again, my plea is start somewhere with a goal of reducing the risk to your system and data. So if you need more information from us, you can always contact us at SkyView Partners. It's info@skyviewpartners.com, or just hit our website, and there's several places there that you can ask for more information. So with that, I will turn it back over to JD.
Thank you, Carol. That was certainly a wonderful presentation, and I hope you all got a good feel for best practices for security administration. I would like to remind you that there is a recorded version of this webinar that you will get a link to in an email that you should get in a couple hours, sometimes later today. There will also be a link in that email that will give you access to the PowerPoint presentation that Carol used. So maybe you can use that for what projects that you might want to address. And as Carol said, we don't want to just provide problems for you, but these are projects, and we'd like to remind you that SkyView would love to come alongside you and work with you on a project-by-project basis. Many of you that are at today's session have worked with SkyView for a long time. Some of you are new to working with SkyView, but if you see something that is a bite-sized project, contact us at skyviewpartners.com. We'd be happy to work up a statement of work for you. I think you'll find that you'll be surprisingly pleased with how affordable that you can get SkyView to come alongside you, and also you have the advantage of actually getting these projects done one project at a time. So we'd love to do that.